สวัสดีค่ะ and welcome to Thailand News Update. In today's news, employment shortages during the pandemic, Thailand's first reported death from the Omicron variant, and updates on the prosecution of the Bengal tiger poachers. All that and more coming up. Thailand has a perfect demographic storm heading its way after 2 years of very swift change in the local employment market. Whilst people scrambled to find new employment in the early days and are now gainfully self-employed, employers are now complaining of acute labor shortages. This problem has been exacerbated by the closure of the borders, stopping the flow of migrant labor, mostly from Cambodia and Myanmar, flowing into the country. They all moved back to their countries in the early months of the pandemic. The problem is also being fueled by a decline in Thailand's birth rate and an aging population. Manufacturers are complaining that they're trying to get factories back up to full speed again, but they simply can't find any people to fill the jobs. Even hotel operators are currently struggling to fill vacant positions as they reopen to tourists, according to Marisa Sukoson Nunpakdi, president of the Thai Hotels Association. She complained that a shortage of good applicants is pushing up the wages as the industry fights for the few quality applicants. In Thailand, there has been big rises in staples, making headlines this week, particularly in the pork industry. Meat and produce prices have been sneaking up and now impacting the cost of living for everyone living in the country. The Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha is calling on the Ministry of Commerce and Ministry of Energy to hold urgent talks with producers of foods and essentials about price freezes or other tools to control the price rises. Prices for noodles, chicken, eggs, petrol and LPG, boat fees, and even toll fees are also increasing. But Deputy PM Supathanapong Panmichao is now asking Thais to stay positive amid the price hikes and claims that, quote, it is temporary, end quote. Last week, it was revealed that crocodile farms have been offering meat from their reptiles at 70 baht for a kilogram. With the price of pork kicking over 200 baht per kilogram, people are getting on board with acquiring a taste for the cheaper crocodile meat. An official from the Ministry of Public Health announced that Thailand has had its first reported death from the Omicron variant of COVID-19. The death recorded in Songkhla province in the south of Thailand was an 86-year-old woman from Hat Yai. She also had Alzheimer's disease. The woman contracted the Omicron infection from her grandson who had traveled from Phuket. The Omicron variant has been spreading quickly through Thailand as it is much more contagious than other strains. But it is reported to be less deadly than the Delta variant it has largely replaced. Following the first local Omicron transmission, officials decided to close registration for the Test and Go program that allowed international travelers to either enter without quarantine, putting the brakes on Thailand's attempt at tourism recovery, despite continuing with 4 sandbox options for tourists. Now, the kingdom has confirmed over 10,000 Omicron variant infections, with many patients reporting either mild or no symptoms. Of the approximately 72 million people living in Thailand now, about 2/3 have had 2 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine, but only around 15% have had a booster shot. And while the government suspended new applications for Test and Go from December 22nd last year, people who already approved are still trickling in, and others are still arriving as part of the sandbox programs in Phuket, Phang Nga, Krabi, and Samui. But despite thwarting the influx of international travelers, the number of COVID infections brought in from abroad has been steadily rising, and the infection rate among those who arrive has sharply increased, with Russia leading the pack. In November, when the government reopened the borders across Thailand to international travelers, the infections rate was 0.13%. In December, as more people began arriving, that infection rate tripled to 0.45%. Now, in the first half of January, infection rates have skyrocketed to nearly 8 times higher, as infections were found in the approximately 116,000 people who have arrived this year, rate of 3.42%. Travelers coming from Russia made up the largest demographic, with the second most infections from the U.S., half of whom were returning Thai nationals. Germany and Sweden were the third and fourth largest feeder of imported COVID infections. In a new NIDA poll, questions about a controversial draft bill aimed at regulating NGOs operating in Thailand showed that people generally supported the regulation. The poll asked people a variety of questions about how non-governmental organizations operate within Thailand. Activists and some human rights groups believe the goal of the law is to oppress dissent and demonstration on the country, while the government insists it's a way to provide transparency and prevent foreign interference in elections and government operation. Asked if NGOs should be required to reveal the sources of their funding, 52.4% strongly agreed, and 27.8% said they somewhat agree. Asked if NGOs that receive foreign funding should be required to reveal the amount and purpose of the funds, 58.1% said they strongly agree. When respondents were asked, will the NGO regulate, bill limit people's rights to assembly or protest, 31.3% said the freedom would be somewhat affected, whilst another 22.8% believed the freedoms would not be affected at all. Full results and analysis of that poll are at thetiger.com. In the continuing saga of the 5 men accused of having killed 2 Bengal tigers, skinned them, and cooking their meat, the alibi they used to justify the poaching may end up backfiring on them as they are slapped with an additional charge. They were already charged with 10 different offenses relating to the poaching, including violating the Forest Reserve Law, the National Park Act, and the Wildlife Conservation and Protection Act. The men claim that they are not hunters, but merely ranchers raising cattle, and had killed the tigers after the big cats had killed around 20 cows from their farm and neighboring farms. But authorities doubt their story, saying that ranchers wouldn't hunt the tigers so skillfully with precise headshots that did as little damage as possible to skins where they were meticulously and professionally removed with great skill. Furthermore, Section 21 of the National Park Act forbids raising livestock or cattle in a national park, the areas they claim they were raising cattle. Police are still gathering evidence in the alleged poaching case. Whilst other parts of the world are battling to open up, despite surges in the Omicron variant, most of Asia is heading in the opposite direction, adding further restrictions on travel around the region. Japan has announced new restrictions for travelers from Thailand entering the country, who must now undergo a full 13-day quarantine on arrival. The new restriction will go into effect today and will affect travelers coming from Thailand and 4 other countries. The new restrictions follow an announcement on January 15, easing restrictions for the rest of the world, replacing a mandatory 14-day quarantine, previously required, with a shortened 10-day quarantine. But now travelers from India, the Maldives, Mexico, Nepal, and Thailand must be isolated for a 13-day period after being added to Japan's list of countries they considered to be experimenting a significant outbreak of the Omicron variant. And now for a quick update on the COVID-19 situation here in Thailand. The CCSA has reported 6,929 new cases of COVID-19 with 13 new deaths. According to the latest reports, there are currently 82,210 in care and 5,255 released from care within the past 24 hours. And that wraps up the morning news for today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep up with all the latest news around Thailand and the region. Also, click the boxes here to watch Good Morning Thailand and also Thailand News Today this evening. I'm Nadi from The Thaiger. Sawadee ka.